The courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes every breath feel heavy. I sat beside Zayden, my son, my heart pounding as I glanced at his small hand curled tightly in mine. The sterile walls seemed to close in around us, amplifying every whispered word and every sharp intake of breath. People shuffled nervously in their seats, the quiet murmurs of lawyers preparing their cases filling the air like an undercurrent of anxiety. Damien, his face unreadable but cold, sat across from us, the weight of his presence a silent challenge. Zayden's eyes, wide and alert, flicked between me and the judge, mirroring a mixture of fear and determination that neither of us fully understood yet. His grip on my hand was firm, grounding me even as the courtroom felt like a battleground. I knew this was more than a fight over custody. It was a fight for his voice, for his truth, and for the fragile pieces of our lives shattered by fear and silence. The judge's gavel banged sharply against the wood, a command that pulled everyone's attention into sharp focus. Lawyers straightened, papers rustled, and a hush fell as the moment approached when Zayden would have to speak. I saw the flicker of doubt cross his face, a hesitation that tugged at my heart, but beneath it, there was a spark of bravery I hadn't expected. This was the moment where years of hidden pain and whispered secrets would either shatter or heal us. Around us, the courtroom felt like a cage, the heavy air thick with the weight of unspoken stories and fractured trust. I glanced at Damien once more, his eyes cold and guarded, like a man who had lost everything but refused to let go. And then I looked back at Zayden, whose small frame seemed almost too fragile for the storm raging around him, yet whose courage now was louder than any threat or fear. In that suspended silence, time seemed to slow. Every heartbeat echoed loudly in my ears as the judge asked the question that would change everything. "Zayden, do you have something you want to say?" The room held its breath, and with a quiet strength that stunned me, my son nodded, his voice trembling but steady, ready to tell the truth that would finally set us free. As Zayden began to speak, the entire courtroom seemed to lean in, hanging on each fragile word that slipped past his lips. His voice was soft but resolute, the innocence of a child colliding with the weight of truth he carried inside. I could see the subtle tremble in his hands, the slight catch in his throat, but he pressed on, telling the story that had been buried beneath layers of fear and silence for far too long. Every sentence was a fragile thread unraveling years of pain, but also weaving hope into the fabric of our shattered lives. With each word, the atmosphere shifted, like a tide slowly turning. The stern faces of the lawyers softened, the judge's eyes narrowed in focused attention, and even Damien's facade wavered, revealing a glimpse of something unspoken, perhaps guilt or regret. But Zayden didn't falter. He spoke not just to the room, but to every heart present, his courage illuminating the darkness that had cloaked us for so long. I squeezed his hand gently, pride swelling in my chest despite the ache of the memories resurfacing. It was as if the truth had given him new strength, a power far beyond his years. The courtroom no longer felt like a cage, but a place where justice could breathe, slowly, carefully, but inevitably. My son, my brave boy, was no longer silent. He was a beacon, a small but fierce light cutting through the shadow of fear. The testimony wasn't just words, it was a lifeline. It shattered the carefully constructed walls of denial and mistrust, forcing everyone to confront the reality we had tried so desperately to hide. And in that moment, I realized that this testimony was more than evidence, it was healing. For Zayden, for me, for all of us who had been silenced by the weight of what we endured. As he finished, a hush fell over the room. The silence was heavy but charged with something new. Hope, perhaps, or the first breath of freedom after a long winter. I looked at Zayden, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and exhaustion, and knew that the hardest part was over. He had found his voice, and with it, the power to change everything. The courtroom's heavy silence seemed to crack as the layers of our past began to unravel, exposing wounds that had long been hidden beneath carefully crafted smiles and hollow words. The truth was no longer something whispered behind closed doors. It was laid bare for all to see, raw and unfiltered. Each detail Zayden revealed pulled at the fragile threads of my composure, forcing me to relive moments I had tried so hard to bury. Memories of whispered threats, shadowed glances, and nights filled with a quiet dread resurfaced, clawing at the edges of my mind. I watched Zayden's small face transform with every recollection, the way his eyes would dart away, the flicker of pain beneath his brave resolve. It was impossible to shield him from the darkness that had seeped into our lives, yet here he was, exposing it with a courage that defied his years. The stark contrast between his youthful innocence and the weight of those memories created a painful tension in the room, one that was almost tangible. As the story unfolded, I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and relief. Heartbreak for the innocence lost, for the silent suffering endured. Relief because, finally, the truth had a chance to breathe, to be recognized beyond the shadows. The courtroom, once just a place of judgment, had transformed into a space where hidden scars could be acknowledged and where the past could start to lose its power over us. The faces around me shifted, some in disbelief, others in sorrow, and a few in quiet shame. The judge's eyes softened, no longer just weighing evidence, but witnessing the human cost behind the case. And through it all, Zayden remained steadfast, a small warrior standing tall amid the wreckage of our shared history. His testimony was not just about recounting pain. It was a declaration of survival, a testament to the resilience that had carried us through. In that moment, I understood that revealing the darkness was not just about justice. It was about reclaiming our story, piece by piece, from the grip of fear. It was about giving Zayden the freedom to be seen, to be heard, and to finally start healing. And as the courtroom held its breath, I knew this revelation was the turning point, the moment when our shadows began to fade under the light of truth. The judge's gavel struck the polished wood with a sharpness that echoed through the courtroom, a sound that seemed to freeze time itself. In that moment, the weight of months, no, years of fear, uncertainty, and silent suffering coalesced into a single, definitive moment of reckoning. The air was thick with tension, every breath held, as if the very walls awaited the verdict with bated breath. My hands were still tightly clasped around Zayden's, a silent lifeline amid the storm of emotions swirling inside me. His small fingers trembled slightly in mine, but his eyes met mine with a courage that steadied my own trembling heart. The judge's voice broke through the silence, steady and unwavering, delivering a verdict that felt both like a balm and a challenge. It was a verdict that acknowledged the truth we had fought so hard to expose, a verdict that spoke to the injustice that had long shadowed our lives. But more than that, it was a moment that marked a new beginning, a pivot away from fear and silence toward hope and healing. The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence, yet brimming with possibility. As the judge continued, I felt the slow unraveling of a tension that had gripped me for so long. The oppressive weight of uncertainty began to lift, replaced by a fragile, yet growing sense of justice. Around us, the courtroom seemed to exhale, a subtle shift as the spectators, lawyers, and even the bailiff began to move, their motions charged with a mixture of relief and finality. Yet despite the noise of movement, a stillness remained in my chest, rooted in the knowledge that this verdict was not the end but a profound turning point. Zayden squeezed my hand, and I cupped his face gently, tracing the faint lines of exhaustion and hope that intertwined on his young features. "You are so brave," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears and pride. In that quiet exchange, I felt the deep bond between us. Two souls weathering a storm that had tried to break us, but only made us stronger. His eyes glistened with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to fully express until now, a mixture of relief, fear, and the tentative first stirrings of peace. I glanced briefly toward Damon, who passed us without a word, his expression empty, defeated. The absence of confrontation was oddly more powerful than any argument he could have made, a silent surrender to a truth that had finally come to light. Nearby, Evelyn waited with open arms, and as Zayden ran into her embrace, the warmth of that moment wrapped around me like a protective shield. In her hug, I saw the promise of safety and the unwavering support we would need in the days ahead. Stepping out into the sunlight, the world seemed sharper, clearer, almost as if the very air had been cleansed by the verdict. Zayden looked up at me, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw the boy I knew before the shadows crept in, the boy who laughed at cartoons, who found joy in small moments, who dreamed without fear. The court's decision had done more than rule in my favor. It had restored a piece of his spirit and, in doing so, rekindled my own. As we made our way home, the quiet hum of the city felt different, lighter somehow, filled with the possibility of new beginnings. Zayden sat quietly in the back seat, his gaze distant but no longer clouded by fear. His posture was relaxed, his hands folded calmly in his lap, and with every glance in the rearview mirror, I found reassurance that the battle we had fought was not in vain. This was the turning point, the moment when justice and courage converged, opening the door to a future where fear no longer dictated our lives. The quiet of our home that evening felt different, as if the very walls held a new kind of warmth, one earned through pain and perseverance. The familiar scent of chicken soup simmering in the kitchen was more than just nourishment. It was a symbol of care and sanctuary, a small beacon of normalcy after days of relentless chaos. Evelyn's presence was steady and comforting, silent in her support but speaking volumes through the gentle touch of her hands and the softness of her embrace. When Zayden ran into her arms, the tension that had lingered in his shoulders seemed to dissolve, and I felt a deep, aching relief wash over me. Here, in this embrace, was the promise of safety, a fragile but vital light in the darkness we'd endured. I watched Zayden settle into the comforting routine of home, the way his fingers traced the worn edges of his old blanket, frayed corners softened by years of use, the superhero patches faded but still proud reminders of battles fought and won in the realms of imagination. His room was a sanctuary of innocence, stacks of beloved books, stuffed animals lined up like loyal guardians, a small nightlight casting a gentle glow that chased away the shadows. Yet beneath the familiar comfort, I sensed the quiet fragility of a boy who had been forced to grow up too fast, carrying burdens no child should bear. As I tucked him into bed, the stillness between us was filled with unspoken fears and hopes. His voice, soft and tentative, broke the silence. Am I in trouble? It was a question layered with uncertainty, the kind of doubt that lingers when a child's world has been shaken. I shook my head gently, brushing back his hair, trying to convey with my touch the unwavering truth he needed to hear, that telling the truth was never wrong, even when it was hard. When he asked if Daddy would be mad, I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because the complexity of love and hurt and justice tangled inside me. He might be, I said quietly, but what you did was right. Being mad at the truth doesn't make it any less true. His slow nod, the soft exhale as he rolled onto his side, was the fragile start of healing, small steps toward reclaiming the peace that had been stolen from us. Later, as I sat watching the rise and fall of his chest in the dim light, I understood how much this night mattered, not just for him, but for me. After the storm, after the fear and the fight, my son could finally rest. It was the kind of rest born not from exhaustion alone, but from the easing of a burden long carried in silence. I wanted to hold on to that moment, imprinted on my heart, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light can break through. In the following weeks, the world shifted in subtle but profound ways. Damon's attempts to reach out were met with firm boundaries, the court ordered a shield that protected us from the shadows of the past. The fear that had once gripped me with icy hands was replaced by a steady resolve, a quiet strength born from survival and truth. Zayden began to smile more, the lines of tension around his eyes softening with every laugh that escaped his lips. He rediscovered the simple joys, the thrill of riding his bike down the block, the delight in asking for waffles on Saturday mornings, the mischievous grin when he snuck whipped cream from the fridge, thinking no one was watching. His laughter, deep and genuine, was like sunlight pouring through a cracked window, warming, healing, and full of promise. One night, amidst the mundane rhythm of washing dishes, he surprised me with a hopeful declaration. "I think I want to be a lawyer." His grin was wide, eyes sparkling with a newfound confidence. They listen to people who tell the truth, right? I smiled, heart swelling with pride and a bittersweet hope. "Yes," I said, pulling him close, "and the best ones protect those who need to be heard." That night, I sat alone with a journal untouched for years, pen in hand and emotions swirling like a storm finally beginning to settle. I wrote, "My son saved us." Not with anger or revenge, but with truth. It was a testament to the quiet courage that sometimes whispers instead of shouts, a courage that found its voice at just the right moment, changing everything. Zayden's bravery didn't just open the eyes of the court, it opened mine, reminding me of my own strength, of the resilience we shared. We had survived the darkest night together, but it was the dawn that truly defined us. And in that light, hope was no longer a distant dream but a tangible reality, one that would guide us forward. The quiet moments after the court day settled into a fragile peace, but the true healing began in the small, intimate exchanges between Zayden and me, those moments where words weren't just sounds but lifelines, fragile threads weaving us back together. That night, when I sat beside his bed, the weight of all we had endured pressed gently against my chest, a mixture of exhaustion and hope tangled in my thoughts. The room was dim, the soft glow of the nightlight casting shadows that danced softly on the walls, shadows that once might have seemed ominous, but now felt like the quiet guardians of our fragile new normal. Zayden looked up at me with eyes that held 1,000 questions, some too heavy for an 8-year-old, but there they were anyway. The vulnerability in his voice pierced the silence. "Will Daddy be mad?" It wasn't just a question about anger. It was a plea for reassurance that telling the truth wouldn't break the fragile bonds that still tethered him to the confusing world of family and love. I hesitated, not because I doubted the answer, but because I needed to find the right words to protect his innocence while honoring the harsh reality we faced. I brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead, my fingers lingering on the cool skin as if I could somehow absorb his pain. "He might be," I admitted softly, "but what he did was wrong. And what you did, what you said, it was right." My voice cracked slightly, betraying the storm of emotions beneath the calm facade. Sometimes, people get mad at the truth, not because the truth is wrong, but because it shines a light on things they wish they could hide. I watched his young face carefully, searching for understanding, hoping to plant a seed of courage that would grow even in the darkest soil. Zayden nodded slowly, the muscles in his jaw tightening as if bracing himself. Then he rolled onto his side, curling into the familiar comfort of his blanket, the one with superhero patches that had witnessed countless nights of fear and dreams. I stayed there, the quiet presence a promise that he was not alone. The silence stretched between us, not empty but full of unspoken fears, whispered hopes, and a love so fierce it felt almost tangible in the still air. As he drifted into sleep, I found myself caught in the delicate balance between relief and worry. Relief that he was finally resting, free from the weight of secrets and silence. Worry for the battles still to come, for the scars that might take years to fade. Yet in that room, under the watchful glow of the nightlight, I felt a profound connection. A reminder that healing is not a sudden cure but a slow, patient process nurtured by love and truth. The days that followed were filled with small, loving conversations that stitched the frayed edges of our relationship back together. Each question he asked, each story he shared about his day at school or the silly antics of his friends, was a thread of normalcy weaving its way through the fabric of our new life. We talked about fears, not just his, but mine too, sharing in that openness the kind of trust that only hardship can build. I listened to him as he talked about his dreams, his wishes, his tentative plans for the future. The boy who once trembled in the courtroom was beginning to speak with a quiet confidence, a voice shaped by courage, but softened by the gentle embrace of love. One afternoon, As sunlight streamed through the kitchen window and dust motes danced lazily in the golden light, Zayden surprised me with a question that made my heart swell and ache at the same time. "Mom, do you think people like me can really change things?" His eyes searched mine, earnest and hopeful. I pulled him close and kissed the top of his head. "You already have," I whispered. "Sometimes the smallest voices are the loudest. And your voice, it's one of the strongest I know." That moment, the weight of his trust, the light in his eyes, felt like the true turning point. Not in a courtroom, not in legal papers, but in the quiet exchange of love and belief between a mother and her son. It was in these tender dialogues that our wounds began to mend, and the future, though uncertain, started to look brighter. Through it all, I realized that love isn't just the grand gestures or the triumphs in public. It's the quiet courage to face the next day, the bravery to speak the truth, and the endless patience to listen and hold each other through the storm. And in that, Zayden and I found a kind of peace, a light that would carry us through whatever came next. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, when the echoes of the courtroom had finally settled and the world outside seemed a little less daunting, I found myself reflecting on everything we had been through, not just the battles fought in the sterile halls of justice, but the battles fought in silence, behind closed doors, in the quiet corners of our lives where no one could see. The weight of those hidden struggles pressed heavily on my heart, and I knew that our story was not ours alone. There were countless others, children and parents alike, whose voices trembled with fear or were drowned out by walls of silence and shame. It was for them that I felt compelled to speak, to reach beyond my own pain and share the fragile flame of hope that now burned within me. Sitting down with my journal, a companion long forgotten on dusty shelves, I opened to a fresh page and let the words pour out, raw, honest, unfiltered. "My son saved us," I wrote, not with anger or vengeance, but with truth. Those words held more than just a statement. They carried the weight of courage, the quiet power of a child who found his voice when it mattered most. It reminded me that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a whisper, steady and clear, breaking through fear and doubt with a light that refuses to be extinguished. I wanted those who felt trapped by their circumstances to know that their voices mattered, that truth had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. But I also knew the road was long, and the journey often lonely. That's why I reached out, not just through my story, but through a call to anyone listening, anyone who might see their own reflection in our struggle. To those fighting silent battles, I wanted them to hear this. You are not alone. Your pain is valid. Your courage, even when unseen, shapes worlds. Sharing this story wasn't just about recounting a victory in court. It was about illuminating the resilience that lies within every child and parent who dares to stand up to fear. It was about giving strength to those whose voices have been muffled by shame or silence, reminding them that speaking the truth can be the first step toward reclaiming power over their own lives. I urged them to hold on to hope, to trust in the light that even the smallest truth can bring, and to know that healing, though slow, is possible. The act of sharing became a bridge, a way to connect with others who might feel isolated or overwhelmed. Comments poured in, stories of similar struggles, words of encouragement, tears, and gratitude. Each message was a thread, weaving a tapestry of collective strength and empathy. It was a reminder that while the pain we endure can feel suffocating, it can also bind us together, creating communities of support where once there was only loneliness. I urged those who watched and listened to become advocates, not just for themselves, but for those too scared or unheard to speak. If this story moved you, I said, share it. Let others know they are seen. Let them know their courage can spark change. It was a call not just to witness but to act, to stand alongside those fighting unseen battles and amplify their voices. And to those still in the midst of their own trials, I whispered a message of hope from my heart. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You have the strength inside you to endure, to heal, and to rise. Because beyond the courtroom's cold walls, beyond the fear and tears, I had learned that the greatest victories are those of the spirit, found in the quiet moments of honesty and love. As I closed my journal that night, a gentle peace settled over me, fragile yet fierce. Our journey was far from over, but I knew now that we were not defined by the battles we fought, but by the courage we showed in standing tall. And that courage, born from the heart of a child who chose to be brave, was a beacon, one that would guide us and others toward the light of a better tomorrow.